Good evening, Tanseyanine. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The discussion of land back continued this week in Ottawa. Hayden King is an Anishinaabe author and executive director of the Yellowhead Institute. On Tuesday, he shared his thoughts before the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee. In his opening statement to members of Parliament, King was critical of the procedures in place to give land back. And when asked to elaborate on the process, he didn't hold back. He said it's shocking that adding to a reserve is complicated and takes decades.
It seems like a very strange philosophy and approach to land back, that where you're basically you finally have your land back and now you're giving it to the federal government to manage throughout this two-decade long process to, you know, maybe have tax-free status, like a limited labor and environmental regulations on economic development initiatives, whether they're urban or rural based. I mean, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, and I think it may perhaps provoke some conversation about a different model of land tenure that Indigenous people can hold, that maybe is not just the fee simple model that requires taxes, and is maybe not the reserve model that requires the transfer of title.
The Métis Nations of Ontario and Alberta are preparing for committee meetings concerning Bill C-53 this week. The proposed federal legislation recognizes the status of Métis governments in Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. But there's been opposition to the bill by Ontario First Nations. Métis Nation of Ontario President Margaret Froh and Alberta President Andrea Sandmeyer addressed the media today. Some chiefs in Northern Ontario say there are no legitimate Métis communities in Ontario, but that C-53 will allow Métis to assert rights over First Nations lands and resources. Froh disagrees, saying Bill C-53 will not do that, and it is a legislative framework for future agreements.
Tomorrow is the first opportunity where we have to actually speak to the legislation and to hear from members of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee, hear their questions, hear what concerns they may be hearing from constituents, and to be able to provide some good, full answers. And I think, that dialogue isn't happening directly with First Nations. I think the committee process is an opportunity for us to actually get, again, that good, clear information out there, and hopefully that will spark some dialogue.
A new report from Food Banks Canada reveals food bank usage rose to the highest levels in Canadian history this year, and it calls for action by all levels of governments. The Hunger Count 2023 report states there were nearly 2 million visits to food banks in March of 2023 alone, a 32% increase since last year. The report calls on all governments to urgently address affordability and social issues causing a greater need for food banks. Indigenous people make up 12% of food bank users in the country, while only making up 5% of the general population. Saskatchewan and Manitoba have the highest proportion of Indigenous clients. The numbers are no surprise to Vince Barletta with Harvest Manitoba, who says there's been a food security crisis since the pandemic.
They have accelerated due to the high inflation that we've been seeing over the last 2 years, rising interest rates. Those challenges are exacerbated here in Manitoba and in many parts of Canada by the lack of response still to challenges of poverty and systemic racism happening in our First Nations communities.
Families who have been pushing governments to search Winnipeg area landfills for the remains of their missing loved ones will meet with Manitoba's new Premier on Thursday. Long Plain First Nation Chief Kyra Wilson will also be a part of that meeting. 2 of the women believed to be in the Prairie Green landfill are from her First Nation just west of Winnipeg. Chief Wilson joins us now. Chief Wilson, thank you so much for taking some time today. This isn't the first meeting you and the families have had with a sitting premier. You've also met with federal ministers. None of those meetings ended very well. How hopeful are you about this meeting?
I'm extremely hopeful. previous discussions in terms of our new premier here in Manitoba have been very positive. So I am looking forward to this meeting.
Now, during the recent Manitoba election campaign, the NDP, who are now in power, promised a search would happen, though exactly what that support would look like is currently unknown. What will you and the families be asking for?
We'll just be asking for the same thing, that we would like a landfill search to be conducted. Obviously, we need to have those discussions with everyone involved, and so I guess for me, tomorrow's meeting will be discussing what is that going to look like for the province.
A few weeks ago, the federal government announced more than $700,000 for further work on the feasibility of the search. Can you tell us where things are at with that?
Yeah, actually, we are meeting with all of the technical experts in terms of next steps. What does that look like for a landfill search? What type of equipment and training, everyone that's going to be involved. So we are doing that work. We are discussing everything that is needed, and meeting with everyone and just making sure that we meet that timeline or that deadline of 90 days.
And last one for you here, Chief Wilson. We're about to get our first big snowstorm of the year, it looks like. Is it still possible that this work could happen this year in 2023?
I mean, it's hard to say, right? Like, as long as everyone is coming together in terms of all levels of government and we're working together, anything is possible. The weather in terms of winter or fall or summer or spring, that has, there's nothing saying that we can't do a search in any weather. There's all these different options and opportunities that we have to conduct a landfill search. We just need everyone to come together.
All right, Chief Wilson, I have to leave it there. Thank you again so much for taking some time for us here today.
Thank you.
Now, in a statement to APTN News, Premier Wab Kinew said, quote, "During the campaign, we committed to searching the landfill. Now, as government, we are following through on that commitment." Kinew acknowledged it will be challenging, but said the work has to start with the families of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. The Premier also said the previous government's approach caused deep harm to these families and to the people of the province. And we want to hear what you think about the stories you've seen so far during the show. Here's how you can continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca, and you can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X, previously known as Twitter. Be sure to follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. All right, we have to step aside for just a moment. Plenty more news when we return, including a new feature exhibit in Montreal.
These wampum are very often the evidence or the witness of past alliances and agreements and treaties.
Welcome back to APTN National News. Wampum Beads of Diplomacy is a new exhibit at the McCord Stewart Museum in Montreal. The collection includes a history that spans more than 4 centuries and brings together over 40 wampum belts from public and private institutions in Quebec, Canada, and Europe. Maricel Amador has more.
Casser les coquillages et ensuite les éroder et ensuite les percer.
The new exhibit sheds light on the powerful cultural and political symbolism of wampum belts. These significant objects made from shell beads were exchanged between nations, including European nations, during diplomatic meetings.
Probablement l'ensemble des wampum au Canada, donc en Ontario et au Québec.
Jonathan Laney, the curator of the exhibit, is from the Huron-Wendat Nation. He said that these belts of truth convey messages that were meant to be preserved.
These wampum are very often the evidence or the witness of past alliances and agreements and treaties. So to say that, to me, is basically saying that these belts are at the foundation of the Canada that we know today.
The exhibit aims to make wampum belts visible and accessible to all. The collection features objects from the Muséum du Quai Branly Jacques Chirac in Paris, which co-developed the exhibit. Emmanuel Casarero, the president of Musée du Quai Branly, said the research shows that some of the belts given to Europeans ended up in cabinets of curiosity and private museums overseas since the 17th century.
Et qu'il est important pour nous, Musée du Quai Branly, de retourner vers les communautés d'origine. Et le McCord fait un travail très important depuis très longtemps avec les communautés d'origine. Et c'était l'occasion aussi d'essayer de tresser de nouvelles paroles autour de ces wampum.
A wampum belt presented by the Mohawk community of Kanesatake to Pope Gregory XVI is also on display. It has been held by the Vatican since 1831.
Original belt was made around 1721.
Hilda Nicholas is from Kanesatake and heads the community's language and cultural center. She said that seeing the exhibit was both awesome and emotional.
Because you think back throughout the history of all the things that's happened to our people, and here we have in front of us these beautiful belts made by women, they said.
Nicholas explained that Lainey approached the community to collaborate in the exhibit. She recorded the exhibition story in Ganyangeha. A picture of Chief Sose Swan from Kanesatake wearing the two-dog wampum belt is prominently displayed on a poster that adorns the museum's facade.
So proud, and I still have goosebumps because it's so exciting, and we're so proud that Chief Sose Onasakonat, Joseph Swan, was the chief. He was a very brilliant man.
The exhibition will be on display until March 2024. Maricela Amador, APTN National News, Montreal.
Well, Halloween is just around the corner, which means it's the perfect time to indulge in some spooky stories. A new book of Indigenous scary stories is the perfect read for those looking to get their fix. Shane Hawk is the co-editor of Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction anthology. He lives in San Diego and is of Cheyenne and Arapaho descent, and he joins me now. Shane, thank you so much for joining us here today. First off, can you tell us about the book and what kind of stories people can expect to read?
Yeah, so it's called Never Whistle at Night, a Indigenous dark fiction anthology. People who are turned off by, super bloody horror can find solace because there's only a few stories that really get visceral in here. That's why we chose the moniker dark fiction. But you can find stories about colonization, about basically body horror, like psychological horror, anything, terrific, it's got a flavor for everyone to enjoy.
Now, Shane, why was it important for you and your team to include Indigenous writers for this book?
So, from the get-go, when we were writing the proposal, it was very important that the whole book be Indigenous. From the writers to us editors, and to those narrating the audiobook. So it's produced by Random House Audio, and all 9 narrators are Indigenous and read the stories beautifully. We were really inspired, or maybe angered, I guess, by seeing stats from, I think, 2019 showing that Indigenous peoples make up less than 1% of the entire publishing industry. And that's from publishers all the way down to, writers, editors, etc. And so we were hoping maybe to inspire new writers. We even have a story in the anthology from someone who's never been published before. And it was really just kind of a project to inspire more people to, get into writing genre. Because across the board, most books, published are in the literary realm, literary fiction, and there's not a lot of Indigenous writers in the genre. Whether it's dark fiction, horror, speculative, etc. There's a lot more now, And some of it might be because of us, but who knows? But it's great to see so many coming out and getting publishing deals and getting into genre like thrillers, like horror books. Great stuff to see.
And lastly here, Shane, can you explain to our audience why you should never whistle at night?
Yeah, so this belief goes beyond Turtle Island, North America, different nations that believe in never whistling at night. I mean, that's why we sort of chose the title, because we've heard it from our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and different nations have different beliefs in what the consequence is, what it will summon. Some believe it draws snakes out. Some believe a spirit will follow you home and enter your home and do, unspeakable things. Who knows? It even goes into Southeast Asia. It goes into Australia. It goes into Europe. Indigenous peoples all over the globe have some sort of belief in, being cautious about whistling at night. And a lot of it in North America can stem from obviously fighting settlers and not giving away your position at night. That's kind of the more realistic approach that, of course you don't whistle at night. You're going to give away yourself to a scout or someone out there. But there is a long history of beliefs in different nations of why you should not.
Mm-hmm. Well, Shane, we'll have to leave it there, but certainly look forward to reading this book. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it so much.
All right, one final break is upon us here. Photo of the day and weather are next, plus the release of a new Indigenous tourism report.
They're going to come here and they want to learn about our history and culture that's in close proximity to our communities.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. This photo was taken by Stan Bevan and sent in by his friend Roberta. We're not exactly sure where in British Columbia Stan took this photo, but it was just too awesome to not share with all of our viewers. Thanks so much for that, Stan and Roberta. Send your photos to share@aptn.ca and be sure to let us know who, when, and where when you do send us those photos. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Beginning on the East Coast at 12 degrees in St. John's and 18 in Halifax. 6 degrees in Cartwright and 10 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 16 in Quebec City and 19 in Montreal. 21 degrees in Toronto and 23 in London. 7 degrees in Wawa and 4 in Sioux Lookout. -2 and some snow is coming down in Churchill and 0 in Norway House. 2 degrees in Barons River and 3 degrees and a bit of snow maybe in Winnipeg. -6 in Regina and -3 in Saskatoon. -3 in Buffalo Narrows with some snow and -1 in Stony Rapids. Continuing west, snow and -1 in Fort Chippewa and some more snow and -3 in Peace River. Snow and -4 in Edmonton and more snow and -7 in Calgary. 8 degrees in Vancouver and 3 in Bella Coola. 7 degrees and clear in Prince Rupert and -1 in Fort Nelson. -8 degrees in Beaver Creek and -5 in Whitehorse. -4 and clear in Fort Liard and -2 in Wrigley. -3 in Fort McPherson and -5 in Inuvik. -8 degrees in Cambridge Bay and snow and -5 in Chesterfield. -14 degrees in Resolute and snow and -2 in Iqaluit. At the Millbrook Mi'kmaq Nation in Nova Scotia, tourism operators and community leaders gathered at the Millbrook Cultural and Heritage Centre. It was for the launch of the Atlantic Indigenous Tourism Research Report. The report was presented at a press conference on Wednesday. It gives recommendations to improve Indigenous tourism in the Atlantic region, developed through partnerships with 33 Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, Passamaquoddy, and Innu communities. With almost 300 jobs generating over $225 million in revenue, tourism provides economic opportunities. Chief Bob Glode of the Millbrook Nation says there can be growth in Indigenous tourism throughout Atlantic Canada.
They're not going to go to BC. They're not going to go to New York to learn about the Big Maw here in Nova Scotia or Atlantic Canada. They're going to come here and they want to learn about our history and culture that's in close proximity to our communities, to our territory, and that builds that relationship between the communities and also with our partners, both federal, provincial, and municipal.
On today's In Focus, we put activism among young Indigenous people in the spotlight. From organizing rallies and walks to creating platforms for Indigenous people to speak their mind and what drives them to do the work that they do. Here's a little from today's episode.
I never really thought I would become an advocate. It all happened when I got assaulted at the University of Alberta in my 4th year. And from there, I started raising awareness and using my voice to help many people, because I realized a lot of people suffer in silence. And I figured I'll do my role as an advocate and create a safe environment for people like myself so that they can live, work, and dream in Alberta and Canada, because we all deserve that.
I think one thing that is important for all young people is to be able to identify what your skill sets are. A lot of young people will talk negatively of themselves and they'll think, I'm not good at things. And so a big part of the work I do is trying to motivate and encourage young people to identify and understand what gifts they carry. And when you are able to identify and be honest about the gifts that you carry, not only are you going to be able to practice those gifts on a regular basis that will improve your mental health and your confidence, but it also will skill you up to the point where you're now able to share that gift in a constructive way. At one point, I was the kid who talked too much. Now it's my job to be a public speaker. And so I want to encourage those kids out there that maybe they're a little too much. Maybe they talk too much like I did. Maybe they got too much energy, just too much. And for those kids that are too much, you're not too much. You just have a big heart.
We wanted to figure out a way to uplift young people to share with their stories directly from them, without having to be worried about, having their quotes edited or cropped or, they basically have control of their whole story and how they want to share it. So we just do call outs and shoulder tapping on people that were making really, really important perspectives, I guess, on social media, and it just kind of grew in that way.
And that is all we have for you this evening on APTN National News. For those of you who don't know, this is my final newscast at APTN National News. I've made the decision to step away. From the bottom of my heart, I would just like to say thank you, miigwech, to everyone for tuning in and being able to allow me to share the stories of Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and for letting me into your home. To the crew, to the camera operators, to the editors, to everybody across Canada, and to all of our coworkers, to everybody I've interviewed. Thank you so much. Miigwech, Kinanaskamatin, and one final time, have a great night.